aspirants. Today we are here to discuss a new concept in the subject environment and ecology, that is food chain and food web. So, to understand the concept of food chain and food web that we are very familiar with, since our school days, we have been studying food chain and food web. But when a question appears in a competitive examination, we tend to confuse over the options. And why does this happen? This could be due to the lack of conceptual clarity, or the generic terms that are used in the concept are very confusing because of our preconceived notion. So let's break it down today. We will start by discussing the concept of energy flow to understand the concept of food chain and food web better. We all know that sun is the primary source of energy. And the plants utilize this solar radiation to prepare the food by using other abiotic factors like the water, the carbon dioxide, and the chlorophyll pigment that is present in the leaves to produce food, and hence are called primary producers or autotrophs. Plants are called autotrophs because they prepare their own food for their survival. Here, let us understand what amount of sunlight is utilized by the plants to prepare the food using the process photosynthesis. Now, let's assume 100 units of solar energy is present at the source, that is the sun. Then, from here, what percentage of sunlight reaches the surface of the earth? And what percentage of the sunlight is available for the plants to prepare its food? Let's see. The amount of sunlight that reaches the surface of the earth is approximately 50%. That is, only 51 units of energy reaches the surface of the earth, and that is called photosynthetically available radiation. Now, what is photosynthetically available radiation? Photosynthetically available radiation is the amount of sunlight or solar radiation that is available on the surface of the earth for the plants to produce, or for the plants to produce food, or for the other organisms to sustain. Now, in this availability of PAR on the surface of the earth, the plants does not utilize the whole thing. They utilize only 2 to 10% of the PAR for the process of photosynthesis. Why is it so? Because the solar radiation on earth is a huge spectrum. Now, the plants require only a specific spectrum of this radiation to prepare, or that can be utilized for the process of photosynthesis. What is it? That is the wavelength between 200 nanometers to 450 nanometers of wavelength of the solar radiation is utilized by the plants. Now, let's see what we've discussed, that the sun is the primary source of energy and photosynthetically available radiation is only 50% of the solar radiation is available for the process of photosynthesis, and out of which only 2 to 10% of PAR is utilized by the plants for the process of photosynthesis. And at every stage of hierarchy of the ecosystem is called a trophic level. Now let's understand what is a trophic level. Trophic level is the position it occupies in the food chain, and it is how many steps it is away from the base of the food chain defines the level of the trophic level. Now, if plants in a food chain where plants are consumed by some insects, now these are at the level of trophic level 1 because it is one step away from the base of the food chain, that is plants. And when in a system, the producers form the base of the energy and the energy flows successively, such systems in this nature are called food chains. Now, let's understand this concept of energy flow, how energy flows in a food chain. Now, in a food chain, we have autotrophs that are the producers of the food, like plants or some other bacteria which produces food by the process of chemosynthesis. And next, we have herbivores. Herbivores are also known as primary consumers. Primary consumers, and they consume plants for their survival. And carnivores are the secondary consumers, sustain or survive by feeding on herbivorous animals. And omnivores consume both herbivorous, carnivorous, and autotrophs for their survival. So here, how does the energy flow through this food chain? Let's assume plants or the autotrophs produce 100 units of energy. What happens to that energy? The plants utilize the energy for themselves for the process of photosynthesis or transpiration and stores only 10% of this energy with them. Now, when a herbivorous animal consumes this plant, only 10% of this energy is transferred to the next trophic level. That is only 10 units of energy. And when the same happens, when a carnivore is a tiger, it's a rabbit or something like that, only 1 unit of energy is transferred here. And when it comes to omnivores at the higher level animals in the food chain, 0.1 unit of the energy has been transferred in the system. So in this system, you can see that energy, as you go through the food chain, the energy levels decreases. Now here we actually have a misconception that the energy levels in an energy flow, when we discuss about the higher animals, we assume that the energy levels are higher in the higher animals. Why does this happen? Because we imagine the animals at the apex level or the human beings to be stronger, having a huge structure, and the consumption of the food and the sources of food are multiple. And hence we think the energy levels are more in the omnivorous or the apex level. But what are we discussing in the concept of energy flow? The energy that is transferred from the first level to the last level. And what is the energy that is transferred? The energy that is stored in the animal. Not when a producer produces some kind of food for themselves, they utilize the energy for themselves and only a little amount of energy is stored in them. Now that energy is being transferred to the other level, and hence the energy levels decreases in a food chain. Now let's look at the concept of 10% rule. This rule, it was propounded by Raymond Linman, and he said the energy levels, the amount of energy decreases at successive trophic levels, and only 10% of the energy is transported from one trophic level to the other, and the rest of the 90% of the energy is lost during the process of respiration. From this concept, now let's understand what is a food chain. Food chain is a chain of organisms living or existing in an ecosystem in which the energy is transferred from one level to the other. Now, there are two types of food chains. One is the grazing food chain and the other is detritus food chain. What is the major difference between the food chain or grazing food chain and the detritus food chain? A grazing food chain has a base of producers and autotrophs, but a detritus food chain has dead organisms as its base. Now, these energy and nutrients are transferred from autotrophs to consumers in a grazing food chain, and in a detritus, it begins with the dead organic matter, which is then broken down into a smaller materials where the decomposers or the saprotrophs, which further utilizes the breakdowns the food, and then this again is utilized by the plants through soil for production of the food again in the autotrophs. Now, moving on, let's see it through an example of picture. Here, I repeat. Moving on, let's see this through a picture. Here we can see the producer produces some food like maize cob, that is the autotroph. And this is when consumed by a primary producer like a locust, it receives only 10% of the energy here. And then when this lizard or the secondary consumer consumes the locust, this receives only 10% of the energy from the primary consumer. And the same happens with in the tertiary consumer. So the energy levels throughout the food chain decreases. And this is what is important here. Now moving on, let's see what is a food web. What is a food web and how is the need for the organisms to form a food web? The food web is a network of food chains. It is a network of food chains that forms a number of feeding relationships with other organisms in a community. And one animal may be a member of several different food chains. Now let's see an example in the picture. Let's take the example of a mouse in a food web. This mouse is a part of grass and it is also a part of mouse and hawk food chain. I repeat. Let's take the example of mouse. This mouse is a part of the food chain of grass and the hawk, grass and the owl, grass and the fox. So it has different feeding relationships with different organisms in a community, and this forms a food web. Now today in this class, we have clear concepts on food chain, food web, energy flow, and 10% Linden's rule. Thank you.